Do you have podcast guests on your show? You can tell me in the comments in this video. And also, do you list the podcast guest in your episode title? Now, this is an important question, and I'm going to tell you if you should or should not. Sometimes the podcast guest name being listed in the episode is not the best idea. So I want to know what your opinion of this is, and if you actually think that the podcast guest should be listed in your episode title or it should not. Now, I'm going to tell you my opinion. I would love you to thumb up this video, leave comments on the audio on Spotify or Apple, and also YouTube. Subscribe to my channel because I'm going to help you succeed in podcasting and become a successful podcaster. That's what I'm all about, helping you succeed in everything from marketing, branding, audience growth, monetization. It just goes on. Success is there, and we can all do it, people. So let's go ahead and do this. Now, I'm going to tell you what I told people in the podcast movement 2025 in Texas. It depends on your podcast guest. If you are interviewing somebody who's a household name, a famous actor, a famous athlete, a musician, a songwriter, an entrepreneur, then you can go ahead and list the podcast guest name and maybe their company. But that could also be wasting space on your title as well when Google shows it. So you have to understand that this is only if the podcast guest is really important. So if you're interviewing Taylor Swift, President Donald Trump, if Ozzy Osbourne was still alive, you can interview him, actor Adam Sandler, those type of people. Then you put them in your podcast episode title. But if you're interviewing John Smith from ABC Company, or you're interviewing Mary Doe or Jane Doe, no, do not put them in the title of the episode. That is not a good thing because people are not Googling them. People are Googling all the famous people. And it's really important to put those people's names in your podcast episode title because when people Google them, they'll come up. But if you're not interviewing anybody that's not famous, you can leave them for the show notes. This is really important. I want to know if you do this in the comments. Do you put the podcast guest name in the show notes or the title, or do you not interview anybody at all? And the reason why is because Google only gives you 55 characters to show up on search results. You don't want to waste those characters with the name of a podcast guest that no one ever heard of. But if you're interviewing, let's say, Taylor Swift, you can say today's episode we're interviewing Taylor Swift. That's it. You can even say podcast guest Taylor Swift. That is huge. But podcast guest John Smith? Absolutely not. You can put that person's name and their bio and everything else in the show notes because you need to take up 4,000 characters anyway on your podcast show notes from the hosting companies. You can max that out. That's what I tell everybody. So that's a really good place to put the podcast guests. Now, keep in mind that you're trying to get rankings on Google, rankings on Bing, ChatGPT to mention you, all the other AI tools and large language models, the LLMs, to list you. But if people aren't going to see that particular podcast guest name as being a famous person, it's not going to help. It's only going to hurt. It's going to hurt your podcast. I guarantee that. But the show notes are fine. You can do anything you want in the show notes. The title is what people first see. Now, I know that when I listen to people's podcasts, the first thing I do is look at the title. And if I see somebody's name who I never heard of, it doesn't do anything for me. I might not even want to click on that episode or even listen to it. It's hurting your podcast to do that. But if you're interviewing somebody who I really like, I admire, a famous person, I'm going to click on that person's name. I'm going to click on the episode title because I get excited. My eyes are going to open up. I can do this right now. I could do this. So I think it's a good strategy. And remember, you're trying to get rankings on Google, on Bing. You want ChatGPT to mention you. It all depends. You know what I mean? It depends on who your podcast guest is. And the other thing I tell people is do not list more than 7 words in your episode title. That's very hard to do for a lot of podcasters. I get it. You want to put it all in the title, but that's not going to help. People don't read that much. They don't read the title. They only read up to 7 words. So if you're putting John Smith, I mean, maybe at the time of, maybe John Smith will become famous one day, but if you're putting John Smith up there and no one's ever heard of John Smith, you're wasting real estate on your episode title. So keep that in mind. And that is going to help. I want to know what you do. Add your podcast to the World Podcast Network at worldpodcast.network. Add it for free. Thumb up this video. Subscribe to the channel. And if you're listening to the audio, I would love to see your comments on Spotify. It would be great. And I got more videos coming, more podcast episodes coming to help you become successful with your podcast. I'll talk to you guys in the very next episode. Bye.